Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I lead a group of intrepid adventurers through Out of the Abyss, the 5th edition D&D Underdark adventure campaign at my friendly local game store. And we've been having a really good time with that. If you're a first-time viewer, thanks so much for watching. If you're a continuing returning viewer, also thanks to you as well. And speaking of returning viewers, let's go ahead and do some quick viewer feedback, and then I'll get into what happened in the most recent session. So put on the +3 glasses of viewer feedback, and let's take a look here. So here we go. Let's take us a look-see. All right, Rob, the viewer feedback was from Rob Plummer this last time. And by the way, I'm very disappointed with the lack of Rocktopus art. The offer still stands. Send the Rocktopus artwork to Shane@ShanePlays.com, and I'll be happy to feature it. I'm definitely going to make the Rocktopus from last video a mascot of Shane Plays. So love the idea of the Rocktopus. So the first thing that Rob wrote in about was, we talked last video a lot about Leomund's tiny hut and the confusion and different things around what it can and can't do. He says the Leomund's tiny hut spell is a very controversial spell. I agree with that, Rob. He says, first off, the 10-foot diameter is not crowded as it's magical. Imagine the tent in Harry Potter that was tiny till they went inside. So I went back and reread the spell, and I don't see anything in there that indicates that. Now, if you DM it that way, or another DM DMs it that way, that's fine. But I don't know of any sort of general rule of thumb in D&D that says that if something's magical and creates some sort of dwelling, that it's bigger on the inside than it appears. Now, maybe for Leomund's that is the case. I don't see it in the spell description, but maybe that's been clarified somewhere else. But I mean, it's pretty clear by the spell description. And again, Rob, I'm not attacking you. I'm just saying this is how I'm seeing it, because at the end of the day, it comes down to A, how do you interpret things, and B, you may have information that I don't, that's been posted somewhere else. So, and I appreciate the feedback, whether I agree with something that somebody points out or not. So it says this is a 10-foot radius immobile dome of force, springs into existence around and above you and remains stationary. So that's literally, it's a 10-foot radius dome of a mobile force. It says 9 creatures of medium size or smaller can fit inside. The spell fails if its area includes a larger creature or more than 9 creatures. And that's the only thing that the spell really says about the size of it. Again, if a DM wants to say, hey, it's magical, so it feels roomier on the inside, that's totally cool. But I don't necessarily see that in the spell description. So, but there's no reason to say it couldn't be that way. All right. So then Rob said, I had a group use this spell every time they were in the middle of a dungeon to long rest, but not to be mean, but they were using it after every encounter. So I started bringing enemies with dispel magic spells and such into the Leomund's tiny hut abuse. I agree. I mean, this spell is open to abuse. The players can, make it a not a crutch, but just, hey, because you can cast it as a ritual. So you can just say by default, we're casting it at night. And if that becomes a problem for the story or whatever, you could definitely dispel magic. Another thing that I didn't mention last video, but I've talked about my group with Leomund's tiny hut, is it doesn't say anything about the ground being protected by the barrier. It just says over and above you. I think the exact language is around and above you. It's a dome of force, and a dome is like that. So the ground underneath you, I'm ruling, unless I see something very specifically that says differently, is not protected. So burrowing creatures or whatever could come up underneath you while you're in the dome. And he says, I think, Rob Plummer back there, he says, I think it's a broken spell and should be revised by Wizards of the Coast. So we definitely both agree. I think it's a cool spell. I'm not saying the spell should be getting rid of, but, just due to all the discussion, not only have I had with my group, but the feedback I've gotten from Rob and others, there's a lot of, discussion on this spell, up to and including, I mentioned last video, Christopher Perkins, who's one of the main people from Wizards of the Coast, and in fact was the principal writer behind Out of the Abyss. He says if you build a fire inside the dome, then the smoke can't get out because the smoke wasn't in evidence before, or there before the dome was cast, or the hut. Why they call it a hut when it's a dome, I don't know. But anyway, and I'm actually not going to be that strict with it because air can get in and out, right? So anyway, Rob, as always, thanks for the feedback. You've got some more feedback here I want to get to, and again, I want to point out I'm not arguing with your point over it being bigger on the inside than the outside like a TARDIS. I'm just saying I don't see it to interpret it that way. But sure, why not? If that's the way somebody wants to do it. Okay, he says, also, Shane, your encounters are way undersized. If you have 7 players, as these encounters in the story are designed for 4, I have 6 in my group, and I usually bump up the quantity or add to the encounters. Gives the monsters at least a turn. Yeah, definitely, Rob. I agree with you. It's something I've been experimenting with in random encounters here and there over the past several sessions, and then in today's encounter battle at Entemoch's Boon, I just straight up ratcheted things up to see what would happen, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Now, the adventure itself is designed for, actually it doesn't say, it just says adventure for characters of levels 1 through 15. I guess used to adventures would say 4 to 6 characters of 1 to 15 or whatever level. But yeah, it just says 1 to 15. A typical group is between 4 and 6 characters. A challenge rating, like if I say that this creature, this monster you're fighting has a challenge rating of say 3, that assumes, if I remember right, a party group size of 4 that are all 3rd level to be an appropriate challenge. So it could very well be written for 4 characters. So we will talk more about this, Rob. I agree with you, and this, a lot of what we're going to talk about in the video today, as far as what happened in the previous session, it just touches, directly on this. So, okay, and then you also said, hey, Shane, this is totally out of left field. This is Rob again, but I wanted your opinion on it. At our game last night, a character ate a mushroom that had a potion of longevity effect. She was decreased in age by 12 years, making her 13 years old. Okay, now I'm not going to go look up or going into a potion of longevity and what it does or doesn't do. The point of, I didn't even go look it up, okay, because the point of Rob's question is here, it's about age. It's not about potion of longevity. So it says she was decreased in age by 12 years, making her 13. So the character was 25, now 13. So at first my thoughts were, you don't lose your mind, just physical characteristics. I agree with that. But then I backed off and just thought it will make for interesting role playing since she normally is the spokesperson for the group. Yeah, that could be interesting. What would you do in this situation? Would you impose strength and dex decreasing due to physical capability, or just use the roleplay aspect of it and leave everything else untouched? So this is what Rob's asking. I responded, I think that if it happened to my group, and this was my initial reaction, and having thought about it for a few days, it's still what I think I would do. I would decrease strength and constitution by 1 point each, and then everything else would be role played. Because if you go for 25 to 13, you're going to lose a little bit of your strength, your muscle mass, and maturity as your body's been maturing, and you're going to lose a little bit of your hardiness. I think it could be argued that a 25-year-old adult has more constitution, more whatever, than a 13-year-old. So that's how I would do it. Now, and I posted that, and Rob came back and said, I started to do this amongst much objection from the players, keeping in mind we are a group of old AD&D players, so I backed off. And that's fine. I mean, you can handle it however you want. You don't want to, even though I would be like, look, this is what I think is the DM should happen. I mean, especially you had a character that ate a mushroom. I'm assuming that the character is like, let me see what happens if I eat the mushroom. Stuff happens, right? But uh, you don't want to do stuff that's just totally going to tick off and make your players angry. Even if you think that it's like this is really the right way to go. I mean, you don't want to do it to the point where everyone's just and just really upset. That doesn't mean that you want to let your players walk over you and use you as a doormat. But if your players are usually pretty easygoing and some issue comes up where they're all unified and be like, we really don't like that decision, take that into mind, because at the end of the day, you are trying to have fun. And it's not just about, I'm the DM and what I say will go. Having said that, I think the DM should be able to go, well, here's my reasoning, and I really think that we should do this, but if it's really going to cause a problem, then we won't do it that way. But then if, like, not long after that, they were like, hey, we can get the DM to do what we want by being unified, I wouldn't let that keep happening over and over and over within a short period of time, because then I feel like I'd be getting kind of taken advantage of by the players, because they see that, united opposition and whatever can maybe change my mind on an issue. So it's kind of a fine line to walk if you're a DM. You want to run a table and you want to, make certain rules consistent, but you don't want to do it to the point where even if you think a decision that you've offered is a good decision and a fair decision, if everyone's just, it's just killing the mood at the table and nobody's happy and they seem legitimately like that's not what we want you to do and we don't feel good about that, maybe reconsider. So it sounds like Rob kind of backed off, which is totally fine. Now it does surprise me because he says that keeping in mind we are a group of old AD&D players, so I backed off. Old AD&D players should be used to detrimental statistic effects from stuff. It was much more common uh, in basic and expert and AD&D and before you got into, maybe he's talking second edition. Maybe second edition wasn't quite so bad, but I think it was still pretty tough. So that actually surprises me that that's the case. But anyway, I'm not beating up on Rob's group. They've got their own dynamic. Every group has its own dynamic. So that's it on the viewer feedback. I did want to mention. So another thing I want to mention, even though we're done with viewer feedback, is I found a resource that I think that will help DMs that are playing through Blingdenstone and Out of the Abyss. And this is a post in the enworld.org forum, and it's called Blingdenstone Summary, and it's by Captain Zap. And I will put a link to this in the video notes on YouTube. But it's kind of like if you've been watching this video series since the beginning, or at least a while, I found a good resource for Gracklestug that kind of showed how all the different quests connected together and the different NPCs and factions and all that. And it was very helpful because Gracklestug has a lot of moving parts. Well, Blingdenstone has a lot of moving parts too. Now, I don't feel it has quite as many as Gracklestug, but at the same time, there's some stuff that's kind of thrown out there, and it's more of like an erector set. Like, you got these miners, and you got this quarry, and you got this, and you got that, and you got inner blending stone and outer blending stone. Sometimes it's kind of hard to know how do they fit together, who's who, how do you get from one to the other, and why would I want to, and all this stuff. And so I'll put a link here, but it's within 2 or 3 posts on this thread, Captain Zap does a good job of breaking down the major areas, encounters, NPCs, and kind of and he also mentions maybe some ways to modify Blingdenstone. There was a playtest adventure called Reclaiming Blingdenstone, and he took some stuff out of that and said he finds it helpful to drop it into the official version of the Out of the Abyss that doesn't have some of the stuff that was in the playtest version. For example, a back door in the foaming mug that leads down into the Worm Writhings, which is an area of the Underdark. And info on Ogremok's Bane, making it more of a legendary threat. And I kind of want to go read this Reclaiming Blingdenstone playtest adventure. If you'll remember from previous videos, I felt that Ogremok's Bane was a little not well defined. And I think I like this idea of making it more of a legendary threat with more definition on, I guess, what it could do or not do or whatever, because it was a cool narrative thing, but the encounter itself was, you kind of had to fumble around, both as a DM and as a player, to figure out. So anyway, again, this is a Blingdenstone Summary on the enworld.org.org forums, and I will post a link to that in the show notes. So, all right, that's it for the helpful tools and the viewer feedback. So I'm going to take off my +3 glasses of viewer feedback, and we'll talk about what happened this last session. Now, you may notice there was another delay. I usually do these weekly. It's been almost 2 weeks. Well, the last session fell on Valentine's Day, and I wasn't going to do that to my wife. So she's very good to let me go run the thing, but I wasn't going to do that to her on Valentine's Day. So one of my players stepped up and ran a one-off, which is what we do in our group if I can't be there and I know about it ahead of time. Now, very rarely I'll have to cancel at the last minute, but I try not to. I think that's only happened 2 or 3 times in the year and a half, almost 2 years I've been running there now. So really try not to do that. But yeah, if we know in advance, then I'll usually ask one of my players if they want to run a one-shot, and that's what happened. Again, we did that, a few weeks back. We did it again this past week. Past week, and I heard it went really well. And they didn't do anything with Out of the Abyss. It was a one-shot for first-level adventurers, and they could either use a pre-gen or roll up their own. So from what I heard, it went well. So I encourage you to maybe think about doing that in your own groups if you have players that you trust. If you can't be there, let them play. Just do a one-shot, so that way everybody still gets their D&D itch scratched. Now, having said that, there was one time I had a player that she kept saying stuff like, "Hey, you're a good DM, but do you ever want to play?" And basically, she was wanting to DM, and I was like, "No, I'm quite enjoying DMing, and I don't want to be a player, and I don't foresee me anytime soon." And she was like, "Well, what about when we finish this adventure?" I'm like, "Well, no, there's another adventure coming. There's a whole thing coming. I'm DMing for the store. That's what I'm here doing." And she's a fine player. It was her and her husband. I enjoyed having them around. But there was one time I couldn't be there. So I said, "Hey, would you like to run a game? Run something. Why for the week I can't be there?" Because I knew she was wanting to, run. And so I thought, well, this is a good opportunity. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I can't be there. I'll let her do it. So she ran a game, and I came back the next week, and she staged a mutiny, and basically said, "Well, I'm going to start running a campaign too." And in front of everybody, with no prior heads up to me whatsoever, I walked in ready to run a game, and she goes, "Oh yeah, well, I'm going to run a game too." And so she put everybody on the spot, having to decide, did they want to stay with my game or did they want to jump ship and go to her? And that was like, I don't usually get angry but that kind of made me angry. Not because she wanted to do another group at the store. I didn't care about that. I was kind of angry because she didn't give me, she had my phone number. She could have gotten a hold of me. She could have said, "Hey, I'm going to start running another game." I've been like, "Great." I'd have been prepared for that. And also, she put all these players, because we had enough players to split into 2 groups. That wasn't the point. But like a lot of these people evidently didn't have a heads up either, or even if they did have a heads up, they had to choose right in front of me and her, and that's awkward. So I just want to say, be careful if you let other players DM your group every now and then. Make sure that they're trustworthy and they're going to be respectful about it. All right. And by your group, I mean, it's not my group. I don't own those people that play, but there is sort of an unwritten etiquette going on there. I'm investing time, they're investing time. And that was a jerk move that she did. To the point where if she came back and wanted, I think she moved and like her husband kept playing her. I can't remember. But if she ever came back and wanted to play again, I don't think I'd let her in my group because I just thought that was a very underhanded snake bite move. I didn't like it. So anyway, that's a tangent. All right, so Rob mentioned earlier during viewer feedback, reading the comments on YouTube, he's like, look, your encounters aren't tough enough. And I totally agree with him. And I've been tinkering with that. And, the group is, I think they're all 5th level now. There's 7 or 8 players. And I got the monk who's starting to get his all special abilities. And he's got Dawnbringer, the Sunblade that you find in Out of the Abyss. He's basically a monk with a lightsaber. And, they've been doing really well combat-wise. It hasn't helped that I keep rolling very terrible initiative for the monsters, whether it's a random encounter or a set encounter. But still, the point is, I mean, the party's starting to kick butt. So during random encounters, I've been adding monsters above and beyond what's called for. 1, to make more of a challenge, but 2, to help them with XP because there's more party members splitting the XP. And I don't do milestones. I just, I'm old school. Milestones, I'm sure, are fine, but, I like the XP way. I like earning it as you go, and how much XP do I have, and, waiting to get to that next level and all that. But if you want a milestone, people, that's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just not the style I've been used to playing most of my life. So, but anyway, so I've been trying to increase the encounter difficulty. And basically, when we ended last video, they had gotten to Entemoch's Boon, they had gotten down into the cavern, they had found what looked like broken statuary, but what was in reality petrified animals and vermin that the basilisks had been eating. And there was a pair of, I think I said 3? Yeah, I said there's 3 basilisks running at you. Or I said there's 3 lizards, but they figured out from the description it's probably basilisks. So we start this session. It's like roll initiative. Here come the lizards. And what I did is I did 1 round. It calls, the encounter calls for 2. There's a pair of mated basilisks in the cavern that's Entemoch's Boon. And I said, well, there's 3. And then I decided back and said, well, there's going to be 4. I'm going to have, there's 2 mated pairs. So they fought 1 round with the basilisks, and then after the first round, I introduced a 4th, like it had just been running and hadn't got there yet. So they're fighting 4. What I also did, the book doesn't state this, but I said that on the cavern floor, all of the area except for the magic circle that's there that you can summon excellent, very excellent elementals with. All of it is, I said, difficult terrain because 1, I'm saying there's like stalagmites, and then 2, there's all this broken statuary, all these crunched up creatures that the basilisks have been petrifying and eating. So I said it's difficult terrain, and I did that on purpose to kind of limit the parties, especially the monk, because the monk will just zip in with his extra speed and movement and just start tearing stuff up. So between those 2 things, the combat lasted longer, but it wasn't necessarily much more of a challenge to the players. I had basilisks doing their, stone gaze. None of the players were averting their eyes. I was doubling up basilisks, gazing at people, and just, they were rolling good saves. Now, I did at one point, I think the monk, did get petrified, so he got, in the way it is now, is you get half petrified, and in the next round you get another chance for a saving throw, and he made that. and then also I've got the blind rogue, Daggers the blind rogue, who's very good for things like Medusas and Basilisks and all that. So he got up in there. But it was basically just a big slow motion melee. And there were ranged weapons and there were spells and this and that and the other, but overall it was just like a kind of a slow motion fight because of uh, the making it difficult terrain, which halves the movement, and then I added in some basilisks and stuff like that. And the players were getting beat up a little bit and bit a little bit. That poison damage from Basilisk was nasty, but they never got to the point where they were seriously threatened. So when it was obvious that the first four were going to go down, I brought in two more Basilisks from off to the side, charging in. I hadn't planned to do that, but I did. So I tripled the threat, basically, of this cavern, because it was supposed to be two Basilisks. They ended up fighting six, and I made it difficult terrain. And they still pretty much did well against the Basilisks. It took a while. So at least it wasn't like boom, done, and there was a little bit more drama because the basilisks are staying alive and they can petrify you and they can bite you and hit you with that extra poison damage and this, that, and the other. But for the most part, I mean, the players handled it. So yeah, Rob, what you said in your comments is right. I need to keep increasing the difficulty because 2 would have been nothing at all. So I need to keep increasing the difficulty. 1, to make it more of a challenge to the players. 2, to make it enjoyable for me, because there's no fun. I don't want to defeat the players. My job is not to get the players, but I do want to have combats that are fun and allow me to be a little bit strategic and stuff like that. And 3, this also alleviates some of my concerns, because I'm like, I've got to give them to 7th level by the time they come back down, because after the midway point of Out of the Abyss, it's like part 1, part 2. At the beginning of part 2, they're supposed to be 7th level. Well, I'm not as worried about that now, because I mean they're definitely taking everything that the adventure is throwing at them, and even when I ratchet it up and turn it up a little bit, and in this case a lot of it. So that's what those. And I'm going to keep increasing. I may give monsters more hit points. I may throw more monsters in there. I don't know. Maybe make their saves harder. Something. I'll keep tinkering around with the difficulty. I don't want to make it too difficult. I want it to be just right. So, and CR challenge rating is a helpful tool, but it comes down to is there 4 players in the party, because that's what CR is based on. As we talked about earlier, if you have a CR 5 monster, it assumes that will be a challenging but not deadly encounter for 4 players of level 5. So that's how CR works, again, like I mentioned earlier. So they did after the fight. They did, I think, because I mentioned during the fight, but they probably would have gone and looked anyway, or at least searched the area. I mentioned it was a mated pair, 2 mated pairs, and now it's 3 mated pairs. Mated pairs of basilisks. I don't know why I said that. I just did. That's what it said in the book. And they're like, oh, eggs. So they went and found the eggs. And I think they took 1 egg and destroyed the rest, if I remember right. You roll 1d4 plus 1 to see. It says right in the adventure, you roll 1d4 plus 1. That's how many months until the egg hatches. And then it'll, basically, mama, the first player it sees, mama. So they're like, we want a pet basilisk. Okay. So they very specifically said they wanted that. They found the eggs and all that. And then on the basilisk, the ones they killed, and the basilisk eggs, by the way, are these big heavy spheres. They almost look like round rocks. So it's just a little extra detail you can give your players. They keep, when they're killing stuff, they keep wanting, like they killed the roctopuses and they wanted the ink sacs. They wanted to cut out the eyes of the basilisks and a stomach. I like, okay. I did kind of like I did last time with the roctopuses, and I said, well, it's a nature or medicine check, and for the eyes I gave a DC 15, And for the stomachs, I gave a DC 10. And they got one stomach, they got no eyes. So that's how it ended up working out. So where things ended was Nomi Pathshutter, I think, is the one that went with them from the Stoneheart Enclave. She's like, she's just so excited. They've got the circle to summon the really good elementals. And the Trist Adamantal piece, the guy from the Burrow Wardens that's trying to establish legitimacy for the Burrow Wardens, is like, what do I do with them now? Because the players want to get back to Blingdenstone. So, Triss was like, they were discussing, should we leave, should we stay, whatever. And Nomi's like, I'm staying, Pathshutter. And Nomi she's like, I'm staying. Because this is like Christmas for her. Beyond Christmas. Big. This is like huge for her. Not only prestigious, but genuinely fascinating to her, given what she does, because the Stoneheart Enclave is all about summoning elementals and all that. And this has been a place of lore that was lost to time, and here it is. She's in there. So she wants to experiment and play and all that with summoning these elementals that are evidently more powerful than a normal elemental. So I think I know what they decided to do was they wanted to get at least one long rest in after the fight, and they wanted to let her summon at least one elemental, so it would be her and the elemental and Trist Adamantal piece, and then they were going to head back, so that those three would, not be defenseless. And then she was probably going to summon a few more, and then they were going to head back to, and she wanted to kind of experiment and stuff like that. So that they're still in Entemoch's Boon, but that was the plan they made. And they did a long rest, and we just kind of narratively, that was just stuff we did kind of spontaneously, narratively. Now on the thing with, I've mentioned before that, when they try a long rest, right now they have a 20% chance or less, and I'm eventually going to bump that up because we started at 10%, now we're at 20, eventually I'll go up to 30, to not getting the benefits of a long rest because of the madness and the nightmares and all that in the Underdark. And, I had the cleric and the sorcerer both failed sleep, so they didn't get spells back. And the tiefling ranger, I added another thing. If you're not trying to get spells back, and your hit points and all that, or you're not worried about hit points and you fail, I think if you fail twice, you get a level of exhaustion. And then each time you fail after that, you get another level of exhaustion. So this character, even though the chances are against it, the odds are against it, has failed 3 times now and has 2 levels of exhaustion. 6 levels of exhaustion will kill you, or at least your character. Now, I'm not going to let that happen. I'll step in and intervene somehow. I'm not going to let a mechanic that is intended to, reinforce how nasty and crazy the Underdark is, and also to, encourage them, hey, we need to get up into the surface because this is not where we're supposed to be. This is a very bad place. I'm not going to let it kill a character. But I'll let them get up to like 5 levels of exhaustion, because it gets to the point where it's like you start failing, you start getting disadvantage on ability checks, then you start getting like disadvantage on combat checks and all that, and saving throws, and then, it keeps getting worse and worse until supposedly it kills you. So there's that. So anyway, that's pretty much the notes from this last session. I really appreciate you listening to the video or watching the video, and we'll be back. I've got a session coming up this Tuesday. It's Friday now, so shouldn't be more than a week or so before you get another video. And trying to think. I think I got everything. I would love to have, as always, your viewer feedback. I hope these are still helpful. I get a lot of feedback. These are helpful to people. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. That helps me. I appreciate it. And if you wouldn't mind leaving the video like a thumbs up and maybe a comment, I would love that. I would really appreciate that. That's very helpful. So thanks so much for watching, and we will catch you next time on Shameplate.